yeah, I see that perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sounds good. Then let me stop
That's
sharing.
great. That's great. Thank you.
Okay,
That was your email with secrets, of course, that we are going to share with everyone. So thank you. We have also, well, I can try to share my slides. I will provide some overview. Let me try this.
I hear Giulio.
Can you see it? Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Giulio on the background crying. I know. Okay, that's perfect. So that's fine. The other two panelists, well, they replied, and so apparently they are going to join us. Also consider that Charles Elkan just finished his own keynote speech. So I think that now he's drinking some water before joining us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to wait also for Dhaval Patel from IBM Research.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have some questions before starting?
Yeah, some of the questions are hard.
Well,
I think that's the goal, right?
I'm not even sure that we will have the time to pass through all of these. Let's start with one or two questions, and also we can give room to the audience if someone wants to give some questions. You know, it's quite weird that we are just streaming these sessions in 3 or maybe more different time zones. So it's quite late in Europe right now.
Yeah.
You are based in New York, am I right? How you are based in New York?
I'm in California.
You're in California.
Right now,
so it's a
California.
It's
so it's 10:30 in the morning. So it's okay, I must say. How about your time?
That's okay. That's okay. It's 7:30 p.m.
Okay.
It's evening, and we have Dhaval Patel that joined us. Nice to meet you, Dhaval. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, you pronounced my name correctly. How can I pronounce you?
Giancarlo, just Giancarlo is fine.
Okay.
Or probably Gian could be easier. And so I like to introduce also Daniela Paolotti and Ken Hao Chang, that are two other panelists.
Hi, Dhaval.
And we are waiting for Charles Elkan, and after that we can start. Dhaval, do you have some slides to share? Or
I didn't prepare the slide. I didn't prepare. Yeah, I didn't prepare the slide.
Okay, no problem. In case you prepare something, we could try to share the screen.
I can do it now. I mean, I already prepared some material but it's not in a form of the slide, but I can actually put it into the slide, make one or two
If
slides.
you want to check if everything is working fine, you can do that.
Okay.
You should be already upgraded to the panelist role, and so you should be able to share them to us. And Daniela, I think that you don't have slides to share, or do you have something? Okay.
No, no, I don't.
Okay. Oh, and I see Charles Elkan here with us. Welcome, Charles. You are unmuted. You are muted. So before the official start.
Hello, this is Charles.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Charles. Nice to meet you, and welcome again.
Yep.
I was one of the attendees at your very awesome keynote speech just some minutes ago. And so thank you for joining us again. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think that we can start. Let me share some slides in order to give you an overview of our panel while we wait for other attendees to join us. Okay, so first of all, let me say that it's an honor for me to chair such a session at DSAA. Of course, as many of you, I would have preferred to be in Australia right now. I am sure I'm not one of the few that is really missing travels around the world, but however, this is the way we are living today, and so I'm very happy to meet all of you, at least virtually so far. So the panel is on methodology evaluation, and I would like to give a very short overview of such a topic. So I want to share some thoughts on methodology evaluation, and of course I will be pleased to introduce the panelists. We will try our best to leave some time at the end of the panel for questions and answers. So please, if you are one of the attendees, if you wanted to do some questions to the speakers, please just use the chat. You can write your questions directly to the all panelists or just to me, and I will be very happy to read your questions aloud. So I just wanted to start a very informal informal discussion, okay? And I started thinking, how good is a data science method? And I linked this question to something that probably is very common to data scientists. As a data scientist, usually we refer to some, we talk with some policymakers, with some commander-in-chief, and we are like probably Mr. Spock in this classical TV series that was called Star Trek, that probably the youngest among you do not even remember. But however, the Mr. Spock used to play the scientist part, while Captain Kirk was the most human person, of course, the commander-in-chief. And there was this episode where all this crew was trapped in a cave, in a very dark cave. There was a creature eating and chewing all the red T-shirt members of the crew, and so Kirk, Captain Kirk, asked Mr. Spock, "You are second in command. This will be a dangerous hunt. Either one of us by himself is expendable. Both of us are not." And Mr. Spock replied, "Captain, there are approximately 100 of us engaged in this search against one creature. The odds against both of us both being killed are 2,228.7 to 1. Okay, just a note, no one knows which kind of statistics Mr. Spock is using, okay? But however, he just claimed that there were these odds. 2,228.7 to 1, those are pretty good odds, Mr. Spock. And they are, of course, accurate. Kirk replied, "Of course, I hate to use the word, but logically, with those kinds of odds, you might as well stay. But please stay out of trouble, Mr. Spock." And Mr. Spock replied, "Okay, this is always my intention, Captain." So Captain Kirk is a very good captain. He listens to what the scientist is saying. Is pretty happy that the odds are good, but there are captain and captain, you know, and you know that there is also another captain from another series that says, "Never tell me the odds." So the problem of a methodology evaluation is the following, and I need to thank Mark Zonfei, because he sent me a lot of useful suggestions about overviewing this panel. There is a performance aspect, okay? We have a lot of metrics: accuracy, we have speed time, robustness, scalability, interpretability. Which of these measures is the best or the most important? And for every aspect above, there are different other metrics. For example, if we are targeting classification accuracy, we can have precision, recall, sensitivity, specificity, that are other finer granade measures. Sometimes one metric is enough, and other times only one matrix or just a subset of these metrics must be jointly measured. Another problem is the implemented method. We have different implementations for the same algorithm that may lead to different performances. But we have, and this is the main focus, I think, of this panel, we have real-world scenarios. We always prefer using real data sets in order to reflect the real world, okay? Just let me, okay, hide the videos. we always prefer using real datasets in order to reflect the real-world scenarios. If that is not possible, we would have to resort to synthetic datasets. Since one dataset, regardless of how large it is only one sample of the real-world scenarios. Typically, we need to use several datasets in order to demonstrate that the evaluation results are convincing. Finally, if we don't have data or we have only a very incomplete data set, we have to work with models and simulations. Our only hope in case of emergencies, think to the early estimations of COVID-19. Of course, they weren't so precise because we didn't know almost anything about the virus and the dynamics of its spreading. So we are going to talk about these issues with 4 great panelists. Let's start with Charles Elkann from Goldman Sachs, USA. But Charles Elkann started his career as a tenured full professor of computer science at the University of California in San Diego. After a PhD at Cornell and undergraduate studies Cambridge. However, he had also visiting positions at Harvard and MIT. After a period at UCSD, he spent sometimes at the Amazon. He was the first Amazon fellow. Leading a team of over 30 scientists and engineers in Seattle, Palo Alto, and New York, doing research and development in applied machine learning for both e-commerce and cloud computing. But Charles Elkann today is a global head of machine learning at Goldman Sachs. So it's an honor for us to have Charles Elkann today, that he returned somehow in San Diego as adjunct professor. We have also Ken-Hao Chang, that is a principal applied scientist manager at Bing's Edge at Microsoft. And Ken-Hao graduated with a computer science PhD from Berkeley very recently in 2012. During the PhD study, he focused on computational human-computer interaction for activity sensing, speech analysis methodologies for mental health, and so on. After graduation, Ken-Hao joined Microsoft in advertising domain, focusing on natural language processing technologies, contributing to the growth of product advertisements on Bing from day one. In the past 2 years, Ken-Hao expands his scope using computer vision technology, building visual shopping capabilities. Ken-Hao has co-authored also a book on deep learning models and applications. So he also published, of course, tons of papers on attention models, chatbot, neural and generation in premier conferences. On the methodological side, Ken-Hao and the team run online A/B tests for every feature, and they are also creating new models or user interaction change to evaluate for users and business metrics. Ken-Hao will share his expertise on this issue today. Davel, I'm sorry, you are the only one with a low resolution picture, but I didn't find any other picture of you on the internet, I'm sorry. But however, Davel Patel did a PhD and postdoc at School of Computing in Singapore, and also he worked as assistant professor at IIT Roorkee between 2013 and 2016. Since 2016, he joined IBM Research Lab at New York, and his research interest is in the areas of large-scale data analysis for knowledge discovery. He has contributed significantly in the development of scalable algorithms and systems to enable efficient knowledge discovery over dynamic, heterogeneous, and massive scale complex data, such as interval data, time series data, spatial data, and so on and so on. At IIT, he was working on text data as well, news media analysis, GPU computing. He set up an NVIDIA research center at IIT Roorkee. And at IBM YKT, I don't remember what of this acronym stands for, but however, at IBM, is developing a SparkML-based algorithm for time series data and AI automation. Last but not the least, Daniela Paolotti, Dr. Daniela Paolotti has a background in physics, and she's actually a research leader at the ISI Foundation that is based in Turin, Italy. Her work has a strong interdisciplinary approach. For more than 10 years, she has been working on applying tools from complex systems, network science, applied mathematics, computer science, data science, behavioral science to study disease spreading from an epidemiological as well as social point of view. Since 2008, she has been developing and coordinating a Europe-wide network of web-based platform for participatory surveillance of influenza-like illness. More recently, at ISI, she has co-founded the research area devoted to themes related to data science and social impact. So, from, let me say, one queen to the queen, because it comes to the first question for you all. Remember the famous 2008 Queen Elizabeth's question, why did nobody notice it? She asked this question in front of an audience of experts, mainly from economic studies, that couldn't predict the economic crisis before 2008. And so probably many of us think that we still are not able to answer to these famous Queen questions. And we also experienced other economic crises, political instabilities, and also a devastating pandemic. We have plenty of data. And as data scientists with tons of data, we should be able to predict some kind of stuff, okay? And the first question, again, is can we accurately predict disruptive events, and how can we evaluate those predictions? I would ask this question to Charles. And for the next question, so we can start from another panelist, just to give the same time to everyone. But please, Charles, give your perspective on such an issue. And thank you for joining us.
I think that's quite a general question. Can you summarize again, please?
Yeah, of course. Again, if we have the focus, the goal of predicting disruptive events, large-scale events, global events, as economical crisis or political instabilities, we can start from data and we can make some predictions, okay? But how accurate are these analyses? And how we can convince policymakers to trust our own analysis?
Yeah, there's a well-known saying, which is really a joke, that economists have predicted 10 of the last 5 recessions. I think, things that are very rare are difficult to predict. And I said something similar at the end of my talk, maybe 30 minutes ago. Machine learning is good for applications where we need to make many, many predictions, and the penalty for being wrong on any individual prediction is small. And we have a lot of training examples so that we actually have data to fit our models. But when we have very few examples, and when the world is always changing, when the environment is always changing, then it's very difficult, maybe impossible, to apply machine learning or statistics in those situations. And predicting recessions is, they're extremely rare, only 1 every 10 years on average. Even things that are much more common, like predicting how well a movie will do. The same exact movie might do very well 1 year, and then if it had appeared a year earlier or a year later, it might not do well because the environment has changed, the competitive environment of other movies. So I really think that it's just not a believable goal to predict things that are rare, and that many environments are non-stationary, meaning that there is no fixed probability distribution from which we're taking samples.
Thank you, Charles. So, Ken Hao, what do you think about accurately predicting large-scale events,
so
and
I think this problem,
how can we measure that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. When I look at this question, first thing I want to ask is what kind of problem we want to predict. I think in general, machine learning is to predict rather narrow or well-defined problems. But for these catastrophic events, they could be in any domain, I think. For example, well-defined goals like what Charles was saying, predict whether movie will do well. We can also do predicting whether who wins a football game. Things like this, I think that is in general what we do. For general purpose disruptive events, I think we usually can do it in a more reactive way, or try to react it as fast as possible, but not really predict that it will happen. Meaning we have trending news, we have tweets, people study how the meme are propagating on the web, and try to capture that and then see if we can do something about it, and then kind of on the social media to kind of give a positive reinforcement to help people to navigate through this. Another way to look at them maybe, or example is people look at the news events, or even Goldman Sachs and Charles domain to do a high frequency trading, right? That's more like not really for the disruptive event, but more like to reactively to handle those things. I think this maybe is an extreme example, but it's more like if bad things happen, how do we handle it very fast? And then once we know what to predict, I think the evaluation seems to be an easy job. You can identify the historical events, and then you can collect all the features beforehand, and then to evaluate whether you predict it well. Yeah, so that's my take. I have similar maybe reaction to the question that for general purpose, very wide range of events requires domain knowledge and so on. It's challenging to do a prediction on those, but we do rather well on specific tasks. We can do a reactive response on detecting sentiments and so on. From news, those are more like generic kind of things.
Okay, thank you. So apparently, evaluation is not the most difficult part, in your opinion, if all the other pieces that we want to put together are well defined and perfectly clear. This is a point. And Davel, do you want to go on and give also your perspective?
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, let me, I mean, interestingly, I collected some interesting paper, like not a papers, but articles. So let me kind of share my screen
Okay.
for your question one. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So meanwhile, I do agree with both the panelists what they have bring up, and interestingly, independently, my little bit exploration work in this domain also bring. So Elizabeth's question was in 2008, right? And then suddenly there was a good papers came out, and the title of the paper was Earthquake Shake Twitter. It was a paper. There was an earthquake in Japan in 2010 or 2010, and this is the paper which actually bring to the knowledge that for example, if there is an event such like earthquake, which is kind of a disruptive event is going on, how do you actually get a reliable information? Because if you get a reliable information, then and then you can actually do a reactive action, right? Just now, like the previous panel is also mentioned, right? So my general opinion in this direction is I do fully agree that it's almost impossible to predict an event, right? Any type of event with like very good confidence. You can actually do a very good job to detect a event. So we always have a the differentiation between prediction of an event versus detecting the event that is going to happen in a very near future, right? So I think with like emergence of a lot of this social media platform, it has made like a possible to collect a lot of information, at least in an automated way, right? And it has made us capable to detect at least certain type of event you know as quick as possible. And some of the event actually include which are kind of catastrophic, right? Say for example, whenever this earthquake happens, the most important thing is you need to know where is your people, so you need to identify the location information, right? So I think these platforms are helping us to build up a very application oriented platform. So yeah, so I just wanted to give you my idea is detecting an anomaly is kind of easy based on the recent development that has happened. So you can detect the event which is kind of an ongoing. However, predicting an event early, actually we have observed a lot of times there are a huge amount of false positive. Now I can link this false positive with the Charles observation, saying for example, you can what amount of false positive you can make, right? Because everything is associated with the cost analysis, somewhat like which we are always kind of do a balance between the false discovery versus what side effect it can have. Sometimes it's kind of a monetary related side effect, or sometimes it's like it can also have a social impact. Saying for example, right, hurricane will come, and then you give an order to take all of your people, evacuate the place. The evacuation is like a very big decision, right? So I think it has always any prediction you make, right, will have an indirect impacts on many other observation. And how do we evaluate those is always a kind of a question mark, right? It's like how do we balance between these two? And one of the other observation I was also having, like there are certain events which are like which actually spread very fast. For example, some infectious disease which spread probably very fast. However, let's say if you talk about political event, which probably the spread at which it happens, like probably it's like, so there are a lot of other factors also include, like how like slow event, fast event. So I think these are some of the observations I was having, like it's a kind of an obstacle, right? Like to fully try to identify what will happen, what event will happen in the future, right? So it's like it's, but still there are a lot of work is going on in these directions, at least. So I think this is like I mean some of the observation I was having for question one.
Thank you. Thank you. Great perspective as well. And the idea of tracing an epidemics probably linked to the next panelist, that is Daniela Paolotti, that she works with health and global health and tracking epidemics like COVID-19. And so, Daniela, do you want also to give your perspective on this topic?
Sure. Thank you so much, Giancarlo, and thank you for first the invitation to join this amazing line of panelists, and for the very interesting and challenging questions, I would say. So the question that you pose is, of course, the $1 million question. When it comes to making predictions about large-scale socio-technical systems regarding politics, political unrest, epidemic spreading, or social disruption of any kind, what I think we should remember is the fact that these are what we call complex systems. So my background is in statistical physics, and in statistical physics, a complex system is a system in which the interaction among the agent that compose a system, the overall, let's say, collective interaction, cannot be predicted by the single properties of each agent. And let's say, very distinctive characteristics of these systems is that they are highly nonlinear. Even small perturbations can have large-scale effects. And the knowledge that you have about the system is always partial, because you might know everything about the single component, but knowledge, complete knowledge of the system is very hard to get. And this is the perfect approach, the perfect paradigm that you can use for a social system. So, for example, predicting the next social unrest. Why did we fail to predict the Arab Spring, for example? Well, retrospectively, people thought that looking at data about poverty in the Arab world would be a very good proxy for those areas in which the social unrest was observed. But actually, retrospectively, what was found was that areas in which there were angry young people who wanted to fight against corruption, those were the places where the social unrest was observed. And this is something that would have been very hard to predict on one side because of lack of data, and on the other side because of lack of overall vision. And another example, could have we predicted the protests for Black Lives Matter? Why the death of George Floyd sparked a series of protests and not the death of the woman who was shot at her home. So these are all examples of highly non-linear and not systems at a steady state that even a small perturbation can really disrupt heavily. And the pandemic in which we are now, of course, fully living since 7 months is the perfect example. Everybody in the community of epidemiology and public health was expecting the next pandemic. The 2001 was a mere rehearsal, and everybody was expecting the next pandemic be caused by an influenza virus. Nobody was expecting a coronavirus. So again, these small perturbations that on a highly unstable system such as humanity can really create large-scale, non-predictable effects. And even if you started sequencing all the pathogens in the world, it would be very hard to predict the next pathogen that would jump from one species to the other, because it's due to some very local, very specific boundary conditions, that is not easy to predict how these would affect the entire system. So despite the models, despite the algorithms, despite the predictive power, having the capability of making predictions on so many aspects on a very, very large scale complex system, such as the socio-technological one in which we live, is very hard. And the final remark I would like to make is, you mentioned the fact that we have plenty of data. Well, is this true? I'm not sure, because in public health, even collecting data about the flu, about the circulation of the flu, is very hard. And the so-called big data sit in the belly of corporate actors, which on one hand don't share this data, and on the other hand really don't cooperate with policymakers. So this abundance of data is basically used usually for commercial purposes, but for sure not to predict issues that can have an impact on economic crisis or on social unrest, not unless policymakers really make an effort to make these big tech companies cooperate with policymakers in what we have been calling data collaboratives that should create value from this private sector data that might in some way mitigate these inability of predicting large-scale socio-technical systems. And I will stop here.
So thank you. All of your answers were amazing. And again, this idea that we live indeed in a complex system where every small perturbation of the system can trigger a large scale effect is of course very impressive, is a common narrative, but probably we do not even think how much important could be this effect even when we observe a very small change. It recalls me when the Berlin Wall collapsed in the 1990. I remember the title of a newspaper that was saying something like the unpredictability of a very predictable event. Okay, of course we were very close to the collapse of the wall, and that could be happening in every second. But no one expected that it was going to fall in 1990. Okay, and I think that probably, as just at the beginning of the roundtable mentioned, economists predicted 10 of the last 5 recessions. No, it's a joke, but it's true, and something of this kind probably happened also to epidemics, no? Because epidemiologists were very, very good at observing the birth of many other epidemics during the last 10 or 20 years, and few of them become a serious threat, a global threat, like COVID-19. No? And this is terrible because the predictions were accurate, but the credibility of the science behind that was somehow put in discussion. Okay, and I think that this is a real challenge. Of course, we are not dealing with a problem like the one mentioned by Davel, that we are observing an earthquake and we are using the social signal in order to predict where the earthquake is currently felt under our feet. No, it's a completely different story, and of course it can trigger a lot of social and also economical, as we learned, other effects. So thank you. Very interesting answers. I would, if there is no other questions from the audience, I don't see. Of course, please, you are free to just write your own questions whenever you want. I will be very happy to skip my own questions to give space to the audience. Okay. But if you are too shy, we can go on with the other questions. A little bit of context, biases and the search for a just data science. So here we have the big domain of algorithmic biases, of biases in data sets, of gender and others. Inequalities. We are all aware that our algorithms are trained with biased or incomplete data, and we wonder how much their results can be trusted. Okay. However, we all have to tackle the problem of proposing real-world strategies to impatient businessmen or policymakers from data-driven models that can be flawed or even unjust. So, do you think that the most used performance measures such as accuracy, recall, precisions, or evaluation protocols that we use in machine learning, like holdout, cross-validation, bootstrap, are suffering from an obsolescence issue? Long story short, are still all these measures adequate for a fast evolving world where biases in algorithms and data sets are really important and much more important than before, probably. I will start now from Ken Hao. Ken Hao, do you want to give us your perspective on this? And do you think if, first of all, the first question could be, do you think this is a real issue or not?
I feel the metrics, for example, accuracy, recall, precision, they are all still very valid and very fundamental to all the data science. But I feel it's really the distribution mismatch is the issue. As we all know that offline we collect many training and validation set. And we try to predict something and we try to apply and then just see how that responds. And then I'll take what we do in Bing and regular search or recommendation system as an example. We do prediction, like for example, we want to predict the clicks, we want to measure, we have a model to predict or to measure whether an request and an ad or a document are similar or not. So we generate some model to do some scoring and so on. We have a model to say, okay, whether the AUC is the best, is improving a lot or not. Okay, and then we put online. A lot of time we see sometimes it gives us weird results. Sometimes it's not because, most of the time it's not because the model itself is wrong. It's the interaction of the results. If you do some prediction on one component, it generates some actions to select different documents to put downstream. It's the downstream behavior that is not reacting well to those new distribution of documents that will perturb the system behavior and then let the users not like the recommendation results. This usually is one thing that happens. Or sometimes user right now at a certain time period, there are, for example, pandemic, or in California, there's this wildfire. They are not searching for this kind of product related request. The distribution changes, the input changes. Or the pandemic right now, the demand changes, that the advertiser, they put less ads, they put out their budget and so on. So the whole big system that we are building is kind of there are so many moving targets. That makes, sometimes we feel, okay, whether this metrics or measures, they are not as reliable. I feel it's often not the case. It's really, the big system is moving. There are so many moving parts. So what we do usually is we collect many offline evaluation tests, test sets, and we constantly collect more data to reflect the current system behavior and use the new data to see whether the metrics are moving. So this is more like, I guess it's probably a ideal world I'm talking about compared to the social science and others. But I feel maybe similar things can be applied, although a little bit more challenging if, you know, you need a good instrumentation to collect the behaviors in real world, more like offline instrumentation, work with policymakers and so on. So that's my take.
And you also work in the advertisement field, and in particular in your world, you have many moving targets because you want to personalize the recommendation for every single user, and probably biases in the data sets can make your targets even more moving. Because if
Yes.
you don't have enough data on the profile that is describing that user, of course, you have to collect them. So very, 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 very interesting, of course, challenge. And Davel, do you want also to say something about that?
Yeah. So the question that you ask, right? Like, do you think that the most used performance measure like accuracy, recall, precision, and some protocol like hold out, cross validations are suffering from obsolescence issue? So
Obsolescence
yeah,
issue.
it's suffering from. So let me, my background is actually in coming from an automations, right? AI automation, and as of now, even a lot of research work that are happening in the field of automating the AI model generation are actively using this measure to build the model. So you can get the data in any shape, but then they want kind of a complete automated way of building the machine learning or AI model, right? And while doing all this automation work, the primary assumption that all these automation platforms is making is that let's use either accuracy or some measures, right? So the point that I'm trying to come from is like if I look at this question from the automation point of the view, uh, these accuracy or performance evaluation or these cross validation schemes are kind of deeply inside the system. So they will be there as a part of kind of building the machine learning models or AI model. But when it comes to the user, say for example, user might need to accept this model that if they use this model into, let's say, into their real world problem, it will actually solve their problem. So at that time, I have seen that the common questions coming from the end user always say, oh, confusion metrics actually confuse us. I mean, so they actually fail to understand what the meaning of accuracy, what the meaning of five-fold cross validation, and they don't want to actually go into the detail of this more technical term. So when it comes to the usage of AI to apply in a real world, I think these terms are becoming kind of they don't want to go into the detail and understand it. So and we know, right, like when we build the AI model, there is also issue of like lack of data or bias. Data might have bias or the distribution might change. So what the interest is coming with a solution is on a top of the trained model, you actually apply all these additional plugin. Thing is that you have a model, okay, there is an additional algorithm which can actually do a bias detection on you. So there are I think an additional set of the models are actively operating on this context to detect, like, oh, the AI model is biased towards certain category. It's a very classical problems like I was seeing. Or AI model has or the distribution of underlying data has changed, and that's why the prediction that are being made are kind of very low confidence. So I think uh, 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 there are the solution, right? Like working with like data lake, I mean lake of the data or synthetic change in a data distributions. There are another set of methods which are kind of being applied on a top of the AI model, and uh, I think this is basically the methodological evolution or methodological shift that is happening. So instead of like from accuracy or fivefold, now it's going, there are another set of methodologies coming up. Is my model is biased? Is my distribution is different? Or is some drift has been detected on what data on what we learn the model versus on which we are applying, or if underlying distribution change. So I think uh, uh, let me see whether I covered the topic that, yeah. So in summary, for example, a place where you invent an AI algorithm or discover an AI algorithm versus a place where you want to use the algorithm are different. One, we say it's a development environment. Another is we say a production environment. Production environment is like where your algorithms are used for a real-time application. Now that environment is kind of has a drastic difference, and we always kind of keep watch on uh, both the worlds. So hope I'm kind of trying to make my point clear. Like the production environment is a real environment in which we expect our algorithm to work, are complex, and there are a lot of as I think the first panelist already mentioned, right? There are a lot of moving component, there are a lot of interdependency among the system software which need to be taken care, right? So I think that are the major focus nowadays, instead of like how can I improve my accuracy. I think nobody asks those kind of questions now. So
So thank you. I would like also later to go back to the first observation that you made about that is not a problem of the matrix, but how you explain the results of the matrix. And there is a point on explainability later. So thank you again also for your answers. And Daniela, what do you think about the importance or not of introducing new metrics just to assess the bias of the analysis of our data?
So these kind of, I would say, a posteriori evaluation protocols work very well in a research setting. For example, when a new algorithm is applied to a, let's say, static data set, you extract the knowledge that you want to extract, and then you evaluate the performance of the algorithm, comparing different algorithms in terms of the outcome that they produce with respect to the metrics that you mentioned. But of course, in real world settings, when policy making is involved, when interventions are involved, then the evaluation of the impact, the evaluation of how good is an outcome becomes really a very complex exercise that should involve additional data collection, additional modeling, And of course, the metrics that you use for these impact evaluation have to be system dependent. For example, in the epidemics, the reduction in the number of cases is a desired outcome. For urban mobility, intervention measures might produce a redistribution of mobility fluxes or reduction in pollution, for example, in a congested city. There is really no, I would say, a priori measurement that is that work for every kind of system. But the most important point that I would like to make is that even the way we choose to collect data is an unavoidable bias. So with algorithms that try to overcome the inherent biases that we know are present in data, you can do a very good job in trying to somehow amend for these biases. But the moment you decide to collect data, you are already inserting bias in the system, because it's a kind of a grid, it's a kind of filter, it's a kind of imposed vision that you overlap on so-called reality, which somehow unbalances the power in favor of the, let's say, actor performing the study. So the moment, for example, you decide that there are 5 races or 5 ethnicities or just 2 genders, and you collect data in this sense, you are already imposing unavoidable biases in the way you collect data. And how can you then evaluate whether the prediction or let's say, knowledge extraction that you perform on your system is good if the moment that you look at the system is already posing a bias on the system? So, of course, this seems like an impossible challenge, but it is to say that we have to be very careful when we decide what is a good outcome, what does it mean reducing biases, and what does it mean creating a metric to evaluate the goodness of an outcome. It is good for whom? Because it might be good for you performing the study, but then it might affect the system that you are looking at in a way that is bad for the system in another not taken into account aspect. So it's a very challenging question for which I don't have a real answer, and the answer in the end is it depends.
Well, the answer is another question, another set of questions that is probably the goal of the research task, no? Just putting on the table more questions and, of course, more challenges for the future. But of course, the importance of being aware about the problems, I think that is crucial for our next moves. And Charles, again, which is your perspective on this subject? Is the matrix and the evaluation protocols false, or just we need a new methodology to measure biases in data collection, in the analysis?
I think there's 3 questions here, and of course they're related, but they're also somewhat separate. The first is the issue of bias, and certainly bias is very important, very real, something that we must always be paying attention to. Then there's the question of metrics, and then there's the question of evaluation methodologies. So really methods for actually computing the numerical values of the metrics. And I would say that the way to think about the issue of metrics and evaluation methodology is to change the focus from predictions to decisions. And some of the previous panelists, and you've talked about the importance of communicating with the decision maker, with the captain of the starship. And those people really care about making better decisions, and predictions are merely a tool towards making better decisions. So the metrics that people really care about are metrics around the quality of decisions. And we heard, for example, one metric may be the number of infections, and then you quickly get into very difficult questions about being counterfactual. So, this is why people do A/B testing as an evaluation methodology or randomized clinical trials, because that's the only way really to know whether one vaccine leads to fewer infections than another vaccine. And in industry, I think the two most important evaluation methodologies, one is A/B testing, and then the other is to do temporal out of sample testing. Almost every application has a very important temporal component. We could train a model to try to decide which stocks to buy last year. And if we do cross-validation on last year's data, that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about how the model would do this year. So the much more informative evaluation is to say, train it on 2018 and then evaluate it on 2019. And that destroys the assumption or allows for the possibility of non-stationarity, that the distribution that the environment is following is simply different in the past and in the present and the future. And that's true for almost any application I can think of. It's certainly true for video recommendations, for example. The successful video recommendations from last year are not the most successful video recommendations from this year. So for evaluation methodology, I would say A/B testing and temporal out of sample are what's really important. For metrics, I would say the metrics should refer to the decisions much more than they should refer to the predictions. And for bias, yes, absolutely. We should be always aware of it. We should be trying to measure it. We should be aware that there isn't any universal definition of unbiased. And there isn't any universal definition of fairness. And there's I think there's some impossibility principles here, and there's some paradoxes, like Simpson's paradox. We could have a medical treatment where with treatment A, the survival rate for men is higher than for treatment B. The survival rate for women is higher with treatment A than treatment B, but the overall survival rate is higher with treatment B than with treatment A. It's possible to construct data like that, and that's called Simpson's paradox. And so then it's not at all clear which is the better treatment. So if it isn't even clear which is the better treatment, then it's even less clear what the definition of fairness is in some cases.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. And your answers bring us directly to the third question, that is explainability. Because if it's not a problem of accurate prediction, or it's not only a problem of a real accurate prediction, but it's the decision that is made upon these predictions, then the problem of explain to our commander-in-chief why we did extract some odds from our data is important. Of course, I was aware that this is a really important problem working with people from the bank, okay? And in the bank, when they have to deal with the credit risk or stuff like that, of course, they can use machine learning, but sometimes they prefer not to use machine learning because they are not able to explain what the model is saying about that, okay? And so, which is your perception about the so-called explainable artificial intelligence or interpretability problem? That is, of course, a trending topic right now in the last 2 years. But would you exchange predictive power? This is my question. Would you exchange predictive power for more readable explanations in your own experience? So let's start this time from Davel. And what do you think? Would you exchange your predictive power for explainable, more explainable models?
So the predictive power is the highest requirement I've seen. So basically, my view of explainability and interpretability is slightly different than, you know, I mean, I cannot compare it with prediction accuracy. The reason is because at least the experience that I have in this domain is a lot of time we work with, you know, the subject matter expert who will be the one who will be going to use the AI model. Now, for them, the meaning of explainability and interpretability is slightly different than so-called, you know, the AI researcher has come up with. I mean, for us is, okay, we have a huge data and we cannot explain the data. We somehow learn machine learning models. And now, because the machine learning model is a black box, and in order to accept me whether this machine learning model is good or bad, again, the good and bad is from the domain perspective. I cannot put it in form of the accuracy or predictive power. So whether the model is good or bad, they want to understand what model is doing. So for example, what sort of rule they are able to make, or what sort of learning they have done, right? So for me, the explainabilities and interpretability actually fall in this direction, saying is that how do we increase the confidence of an end user, saying is that this is the model that, you know, basically it's kind of trying to mimic an SME. So uh, we have lots of times used the explainabilities and interpretability of a model just to increase the confidence of the end user, but end user always wanted to have a model which perform as, you know, accurate as possible. So I mean, I think still, you know, this you know, interchanging the, you know, explainability versus predictive power, right? Otherwise, you know, everybody could have started building decision tree, and then, oh, it's no, the decision tree is explainable, no need to, you know, spend a lot of times on. But I think the research is going in a more the other side, right? uh, let's increase the predictability of a model and then build an additional tool to explain the model. So, you know, I think that's my answer in this direction.
Okay, thank you. Of course, the problem of interpretability can change a lot from applications field to another. And I would also ask to Daniela Pavolotti, that she deals with predicting epidemic experience, if she would change predictive power over models in change of more interpretable models that can be explained to policymakers.
So yeah, of course, it cannot be denied that the combination of data, abundance of data, computational capabilities, tools like machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, so whatever we call AI is really changing how we do science, and is really creating a revolution in the way we study social systems. As you mentioned, the predictive power, the predictive capability has been enormously enhanced at the expense of having a black box doing an amazing job, but you don't know how it does it. So, but for some, let's say, fields or areas, for example, computer vision applied to skin lesion images, so somehow trying to discriminate whether a skin lesion can be cancer or not, has been shown to be really incredibly effective in supporting dermatologists to do, let's say, a very good job on a number of patients. Or we have seen works on how search engine queries can really help predicting a number of rare cancer diagnoses and so on and so forth. And this is all good, but on one hand, there are the obvious issues related to ethics. How much can you trust the decisions assisted by the support or through the support of a black box? So we won't go into the ethical issues, which would deserve an entire conference themselves. But from a perspective of public health and epidemiology, the predictive power is nothing if you don't know where to put your interventions. So these incredibly effective predictive power comes at the expense of not understanding the phenomenon that you are observing at a microscopic level. This means that you don't have transparency, you don't know how things work, and so you cannot basically create guidelines for interventions. You don't know where to change the bolts and nuts of the system. And especially for epidemic, this is really, really important because suggesting interventions to policymakers is really crucial in order to contain a pandemic or to somehow improve the health of the population. And if you don't know how the system works at a microscopical level, you cannot really come up with guidelines. And so let's say the computational power and the predictive power of data and AI is very useful in a number of applications, especially in medicine. But when it comes to public health, this lack of understanding of the phenomena at a microscopic level can really be a problem. And you have to really resort to, of course, data, but more mechanicistic, let's say, models that rely on understanding the phenomenon, the components of the phenomenon that you want to predict.
Because also, of course, you in your field, you need to compare different strategies, different immunization strategies, and you really need to compare understandable scenarios. So of course, I understand that in your field, a trade-off must be made. So thank you, Daniela. And Charles, which is your perspective on this issue? Is explainability a thing, or is just a trend in your field, also in your company?
So explainability is certainly a very important issue, but I think that in practice, it's the tip of an iceberg. And the iceberg is really the comfort level of decision makers with methods and with new methods. You know, everyone is always busy. So people want explainability at the beginning because they want to gain comfort, to feel comfortable that they can trust a method. So they want explanations of decisions. And then if they're satisfied with the explanations, then after a while, they don't want the explanations anymore. They're too busy. They want to move on to something else, and they trust the method. But the potential to provide explanations is certainly important for regulators. It's important for communicating with customers. It's interesting. Now, I am definitely not a lawyer. I don't work in Europe, and I'm not saying anything in an official capacity. But I think, unlike a lot of people, I have actually read the text of the GDPR. I think many people talk about GDPR, but they actually haven't read it. And my personal interpretation of what the GDPR says, it doesn't particularly provide a right to explanation. What it does is it provides a right to appeal, that if somebody has been subject to an adverse decision by a machine learning or automated method, then they have the right to appeal to a human to possibly have that decision reversed. And then if a customer is appealing a negative decision, they applied for a credit card and they were denied the credit card, then it's certainly important to be able to provide a reason to the customer. But that reason will never be a complete and detailed explanation. So the reason might be, well, I'm sorry, your income level is too low, or you have only been employed in your current job for not enough months. But if they'd been employed in their current job for the same number of months, but many other things had been different also, then maybe they would have received the credit card. So the explanation is never a complete explanation, is never an if and only if formal logical explanation. So explanations are just the tip of the iceberg. Like I said, the real issue is trust in the method.
So thank you. This is a very fresh, novel perspective. At least for me, it's really important because you say also that when you talk to clients or to decision makers, you just need to convince them at first, or after that they are convinced that you are right, and they don't ask explainability anymore. That's a good point. That's a good point. Let's go for the fourth question and the last one. Sorry, there was King Hao. I was missing you, King Hao. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Before moving to the fourth question, there is King.
No problem. I have very similar feedback and thought on this question. We always, on the recommendation industry domain, we also always strive for a very strong predictive power. But when it comes to having a problem that, okay, the model is not performing well, then we are forced to look at this explainable AI and interpretability. To me, it's more like a debuggability and fixability. If it's making us, we can always look at data and then we always see, okay, nowadays the deep learning and all these efforts, DNN efforts, they are making the predictive power much better and then make our general metrics trend doing pretty well. We see a lot of improvement using that. But when we come down to, okay, some cases that we do wrong, basically, for example, just query and add that the quality, it's obvious this AI is bad. And then, but we give a high score. Then that's when we scratch our head. And then we review our features, and then we often find that, okay, the traditional way of like information retrieval-based kind of term-based matching, even some category-based matching, all of that signal is more explainable, decision tree is more explainable, and then how do we balance the two? And then as Dabao was saying that there are tools that are being developed by this community to augment the DNN deep learning efforts to help us to do better job on those, and then kind of take actions from there and then fix from there. It's I think it's still an ongoing research question, and then we do definitely feel that as a debuggability, I would say. Yeah, so that's my short answer.
Thank you, thank you. Also, I would ask, but of course we do not have 3 hours for doing many questions and answers. But I would ask, what about a recommendation? If I receive a recommendation that offends me somehow, if I can connect with the answer, the Charles answer. Sometimes in some countries, at least, I do have the right to appeal. And if I receive some recommendation that offended me for some reasons, I would also receive explanations of why I received such recommendations that probably in your field could be of interest. But I don't want to waste your time with another questions that I didn't prepare for you earlier. But of thoughts in the future. The last question, it's something that is also connected to the final remarks of Charles' keynote speech 1 hour ago, because he talked a lot about Google results, Netflix recommendations, and we know that when we are promoting, I don't know, a video or a site, a movie, a song, of course we want to know which is the brain in the core of a recommendation engine or the new page rank, the new Google page rank, because of course we wanted to be ranked at the top, we wanted to be recommended to everyone, okay? And so this starts a kind of feedback process, a feedback loop. And I to the phenomenon that is known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. And when we make analysis on real-world phenomena, in most of the cases, we want to predict something likely, for example, of a product, demonetization strategy, or the rise or the collapse of one country's economic status. Unlike with other domains, where the prediction usually does not affect phenomenon, in meteorology or astronomy are into play, the predictions can be. So the last question so depend interplay between the of our future time start here. And then Daniela, are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry, my connection is not so good, so my
can
you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Very good, sorry.
You're perfect, I hope.
So, since we are almost up with the time, this is a very, very interesting question that takes us back to the second question that you pose, and where we mentioned how the evaluation of the impact goes hand in hand with the kind of perturbation, basically, that you perform on the system you want to study. So in socio-technical systems is a continuous feedback loop between measurement, interventions, and then again measurements. But for epidemics, this feedback loop, when evaluating the goodness of an intervention, is particularly nasty, because preventing a contagion from spreading means that then the disease will eventually disappear from the population, and then you might end up under public scrutiny because your intervention was deemed as useless or harmful, because you see there is no disease among the population. So these self-fulfilling prophecies might really create problems, for example, in public health when it comes to communication, because if you are too successful in containing an epidemic, then it means that there was no need for such interventions. We have seen how many discussions during the lockdown have been done in the various countries when the pandemic was actually contained, well, then there was no need for the lockdown. So for this reason, especially in public health, the impact evaluation becomes really a crucial exercise that focuses around the continuous collection of accurate data that will allow the monitoring of the system, even when apparently the self-fulfilling prophecy has been created, because this only approach, continuous monitoring, will allow you to really understand whether you did a good job or not. And we always have to keep in mind the communication aspects that can be really tricky. Yeah.
So thank you, Daniela. And so it's time for Charles to reply to my question. What do you think about the interplay, of course, that is well known in your field, especially, and self-fulfilling prophecies? Do you have measures for this phenomenon?
Self-fulfilling prophecy is an extreme version of the issue, but we certainly encounter less extreme versions quite frequently. One less extreme version of the issue is that if we have certain groups of people, let's say that we are giving credit cards to people, approving people for credit card applications, and let's say we have a group of people for whom we have limited information, maybe, for example, as new immigrants. And so the models will naturally decline applications from people with limited information. And then we won't be able to collect information about those people. So it's going to be difficult for the models to learn that maybe those people would be good customers. So one aspect of self-fulfilling prophecy is definitely that when there's a lack of information about people in a certain category, then we need to do extra work to gain information and possibly to do experiments and make sure that we are not just continuing to neglect the people in those categories. And it doesn't have to be people, it could be any sort of subcategory of examples. Then when it comes to things like recommendations, there certainly is the possibility of filter bubbles, that we recommend things to people, people accept the recommendations, so we recommend more things like that, and we don't recommend things that are outside their pre-existing range. But recommendation algorithms can be tuned to put value on novelty, and it's really up to the decision makers to figure out what are the objectives, what are the metrics to use for the decisions. And part of the metric one of the metrics may be how many new recommendations are delivered and how many new recommendations are accepted. So we can have a metric that tries to reduce the filter bubble effect. There can also be quite subtle effects of self-fulfilling prophecies. Imagine that we're doing A/B testing of two different algorithms for recommending products for purchase. And let's say both these algorithms for recommendations are going to take into account bestsellers. It's natural that if a product is very popular, you should recommend it more often. So supposing that we have one successful recommendation algorithm, call it A, and then we have a less successful algorithm, call it B, but B is paying attention to popularity. So the algorithm A is going to be recommending successful products, and so those are going to become popular. And so the algorithm B is then going to be observing that popularity and copying the algorithm A. So even if in our A/B test, which is a randomized trial, the algorithm A is really much better because the algorithm B can be copying A, it may be less visible that A is much better than B. And that's an example, something related to self-fulfilling prophecy, where a method is really looking better than it should because it's really following the coattails of a different method. So I think overall, I'd say there are multiple issues that are related to self-fulfilling prophecy. And an interesting research question would be to really be systematic in categorizing all the issues and then figuring out which issues are variations of the same versus which issues are fundamentally different.
Thank you. It's a research question that worth investigating, and I hope, really hope that someone will follow up. Ken Howe, what do you think about self-fulfilling prophecy? Of course, I think also that in advertisement, self-fulfilling prophecies
yes,
can be exploited somehow.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about the second order effect or n order effect that if we impose some system change. I'll take some example and to showcase. The idea is we want to know, okay, if the relevance will change ads users ad click propensity. Let me try to share the screen. Okay, this is something that I prepared. We often are curious whether an ad is relevant to a user, and then whether when users see the ad, a bad ad, whether they will feel bad about the system, and how is that impacting the user's click propensity. So this is basically, we often measure A/B tests. We often measure the first order effect. We put some system change and then we try to measure the first order effect. But the second order to nth order effect is often a big question that we are talking about. So we designed some way experiment to study this. And the experiment that we try to study is if we let user split the users, some users see better relevance of ad, some users see less relevance of ad, and then we revert the experiment after some time and then let them start seeing the same set of ads, and then just see if the users are clicking more or not. So basically, and then we see that users who see better ads, they continue to click more, and then they kind of gradually come down to a neutral level. For users who see less relevant ads, after the experiment, they click less because they have this kind of bad impression on the system behavior. And it will take some time for user to come back after a month. So that's more like the second order effect. So one putting on the table is we can measure this by close experiments, but basically it's kind of like it's a long-term experiment and randomized trial, but you can answer these questions by closely design your experiments to answer those, and then to probably get some insights. And then sometimes we in this case, sometimes it's a balance of revenue and relevance. So sometimes we will ask, okay, if we degrade the relevance for certain amount, but if we can see a lot of revenue in this first order impact, is that a good thing? Right? How much of the relevance degradation and revenue increase, that ratio, how much of ratio can we balance? And then this second order effect is something that this experiment is something that help us to find that ratio. I wouldn't go to details, but this is a good thing to share with everyone.
Thank you also for opening the Microsoft box on this issue, and thank you, very, very interesting. And so, Dhaval, we will have the honor to conclude this roundtable. And which is your perspective on self-fulfilling prophecies?
Okay, let me, in the interest of time, let me go it very quickly. So what I have observed is we define a business KPI, key process indicator. And this is what have always been kind of monitored after let's say you build an AI or automation model. So with I mean, what I mean to say is that you did prediction, and whenever you do prediction, it will always have some reaction. Like in our domain, what happened is that we works on a lot of intelligence system management. So for example, a lot of intelligence asset. So we say, oh, it's going to down, right? And then coming back to exactly your questions, right? When we say that the system is going to down, that they need to make decision, right? Saying is that shall we set up an or repair, so shall we do we send an SME somewhere in the Middle East or far from the city? So each and every prediction we made, it has a consequences, right? Some operator has to make some decisions and all. So we always have this a KPI, like which kind of getting monitored. And these KPIs are varies actually from the domain to domain, right? So just now, for example, in the previous panelist, right, was giving an example for a advertised domain. But in our case, the KPI is, for example, how many repair we needed to do versus what was the usual rate of doing the repair work. So there is an additional quality matrices, I would say, exist actually to determine the impact of prediction models into the real world. And that's what basically uh, all of our prediction models that we deployed in the field go through that quality check for 2 to 3 months. So they basically have some kind of a simulation study in place to kind of a mimic, right? Like if we have adopted this, okay, what are the action we could have taken and what can be consequences of those actions. So I think these are additional quality matrices we have been kind of being used, right? So it is somewhat related with your question number 2, but over there we don't have an accuracy. We have a business KPI, and which need to demonstrate it is improving their KPI. Otherwise, like all the there is no meaning of like making a prediction. So yeah. So now there are a lot of recently a lot of specialized area is coming, like AI for social good. Maybe I don't know, I mean, whether the question 4 is somewhat related with the AI for social good or not, but at least like in an industrial domain, we have this KPIs, which is kind of being used to see whether what are the effect of making predictions and how do we evaluate those from the business domain.
Well, thank you also for your perspective. Of course, we can define social optimal KPIs for the future, also to include the social good goals in our future systems. So thank you definitely. Thank you to you all. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions from the audience, but here you can find all the emails from us. So please contact us directly if you have questions. Just remember that this conversation has been recorded, so it will be possible to be downloaded even in the next few days from the DSAA site. So thank you everyone. It was a real amazing panel with fantastic and stellar panelists. I was very honored to be part of that. I hope that you didn't offended by the triviality of these questions, but however, from my point of view, it was fun. So thank you for being with us, and I hope to see you in person as soon as possible. Thank you to all you all.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.